Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. Back with us on the program, Dan Rome. Dan is the author of the international bestseller, The Back of the Napkin, the most popular visual thinking business book of all time. Fast Company, Business Week, Times of London, all named The Back of the Napkin the #1 creativity and innovation book of the year. Also a bestseller, Unfolding the Napkin. Dan is the founder and president of Digital Rome, a management consulting firm that uses visual thinking to solve complex problems for clients like Google, Boeing, eBay, Microsoft, Wal-Mart, Wells Fargo, the U.S. Navy, U.S. Senate, Gap, Kraft, Lucasfilm, and many more. He's the author of the new book, Show and Tell, How Everybody Can Make Extraordinary Presentations. Dan, welcome back to the program. Great to have you with us again.
Rick, thank you so much for inviting me back. It's always been a pleasure, and I look forward to doing it again.
Well, I am so into this, and you've got to go find the books that I had talked about, the Napkin series. You can go to Dan's website, danrome.com, R-O-A-M, and you go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on as well. It's a great concept. It's a concept. I mentioned some of the major corporations around the country that use this. It really works, and it's going to be fun talking about it on the program today. And if you're thinking, okay, this is just another business book, someone said in a review, this isn't really a business book, this is a human book. And it really isn't a business book per se, is it?
It is, and it's not. Don't tell my publisher I said so. Of course it's a business book. But no, what it really is it's a book for people, about people. And one big part of that, of course, is business. And that's a big audience. So yes, Rick, it's absolutely a business book. But you know what? It's for everybody.
Well, it's more than a business book because, yeah, you can use it for business. You can use it at all types of presentations. The neat thing with this whole concept didn't come to you like in grad school. This is a concept that came to you in kindergarten. Explain how basic this is.
Well, people fall into sort of two different schools of thought back in the kindergarten days. There were people who really loved doing show and tell, and then there were people who hated doing show and tell. I've never met anyone in that second school. What I know is talking to people, they remember back to when they were little, and they had something that they wanted to share, and it was the day at show and tell, and they got to show their airplane model, or they got to show their favorite stuffed bear. Everybody loved doing it. Some of us, when we got up on the front of the room and realized, my gosh, everybody's looking at me with my model airplane or my stuffed bear, this is kind of intimidating. I didn't think that was going to happen. But you know what? Because we knew what we were going to talk about, we got through it. So those are the big lessons that I want to emphasize for today, because when we think about it, look, Rick, I've come to the realization, I think this is absolutely true, that there is nothing, and I mean nothing, that is more important to our own professional success, and in many ways our own personal success, than our ability to share our idea in public. And yet, the biggest fear that most Americans have, measurably, is a fear of public speaking. So all of a sudden, we see why success can be so hard, because the number one thing we need to be able to do really well is the number one thing that most of us are most afraid to even try. And we don't need to be. Let's remember what we did with show and tell a long time ago, figure out what made that work, and do the same thing now.
Dan Rome's new book is Show and Tell. It's available all across the country. Information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Dan's website is danrome.com. The book is Show and Tell, How Everybody Can Make Extraordinary Presentations. And we're talking about the concept of using pictures. And I hope you've had a chance to hear the other programs we've done with Dan. But I mean, in the book you talk about, most of our brain is dedicated to vision. This makes so much sense because when you see something, a picture, a graph, a chart, whatever, it has so much more impact than reading just plain words.
Well, and that holds absolutely true, if not even more so, when we're in a presentation situation. That is to say, we're up in front of the room. We're in the conference room at the head of the table, or in many cases, we might be in an auditorium where we're the one up on stage, and we've got a story that we need to tell. Well, one of the ways for us to make that story much more compelling for ourselves and for our audience is to activate the visual side of everybody's mind. And that's really simple to do. All we need to do are show pictures that complement the words that we're saying. And, we don't have to go very far to imagine this ourselves. If I'm standing up on stage and all I'm showing you is slide after slide of bullet points, and you can just read those as faster than I can say them, your visual mind, which, as you pointed out, occupies more than half of our entire brain, is going to get bored. If there's nothing compelling to look at, the visual mind is going to just start making stuff up. So as the presenter, it is our responsibility now, and in fact, it's also our pleasure to be able to provide the pictures so that our audience's visual mind is fully occupied while we're talking. And then you know what? We can keep that audience glued to what we're saying and what we're showing for hours.
Yeah, and this is not another PowerPoint presentation. I sit through those and I'm turned off and not really listening when I even hear or see that it's going to be a PowerPoint presentation. And you point out that like every slide basically has to have a picture. What you're doing is really reinforcing the visual aspect of that to keep our attention.
Well, in fact, I think every good slide, whether it's PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever tool we're using to compose and present our show, every slide in that should only have three things and no more. It should have a headline that says, here is the idea on this slide. Then it should have an image, a picture, a photograph, a drawing, a chart, or a sketch that supports that idea and that idea only. And then the third thing is it should have a very, very brief, no more than one sentence piece of narration that describes the essence of that idea in more detail. And it should have nothing more than that. And so many people might say, well, okay, but my ideas are complicated. How am I going to get a complex idea into a slide that just has a headline, a photo, and a piece of text? Well, what we do is we break our complex idea up across multiple slides. So what we're doing as we're presenting is each time we come to a slide, there's only one idea, and it is absolutely clear what it is. Everybody understands it. And then we move on to the next idea. And what we can do is we can explain something of any level of complexity by just doing it as a gradual build and making sure that at each step along the way, we say, this is the idea of this step, here's the image that supports it, and here's the very small piece of text that makes it specific.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've got the element of timing in your favor, too, because you're really keeping the presentation moving.
Well, and you nailed it, and back to our visual mind. What is our visual mind most captivated by? Well, it's captivated by lovely things. It's captivated by attractive colors, of course, but more than anything else. And this is, millions and millions of years of evolution. Our visual mind is captured by movement because movement is what tells us where to look. And when something is moving, that tells our most ancient mind, pay attention. There may be trouble there, or there may be a great reward there. Things that are not moving at all are of not much interest to us. So, again, I'm looking at this slide up on the screen. There's 27 bullet points. There's nothing moving. There's nothing for me to be interested in. You better be a pretty compelling talker for me to give you any more than about 2 or 3 minutes worth of attention. How to flip that around? Move the slides as we go. And we don't need a constant send of motion. Sometimes we need to take a pause and let the visual mind and the entire cognition system digest what it's just seen and heard and make sure it makes sense. And then when everybody's digested it, we move on again. So you're absolutely right. You nailed it, Rick. Motion is key.
Show and Tell, the new book by Dan Rome, How Everybody Can Make Extraordinary Presentations. It is simple, and you're saying, and when you put it in these terms, it's like, yeah, I can understand this. What we're trying to do in a presentation is to get everyone in the room, or the majority in the room, to really see it the way we see it. And there we are, back to the visual again.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have sort of two central thoughts about giving a presentation. The first one is, and you nailed it, what is the point of a presentation? There's no other reason to do it than to try to get you, my audience, to see in your mind what I see in mine. That's the only reason to do it. And to know if I'm doing that well comes the second sort of rule. Any good presentation changes people. It changes the people in the audience a lot, and if it's really good, it might even change the presenter himself or herself a little bit as well. Think about it this way. If we go to give a presentation, and at the end of it, we have not changed our audience in some way, and it doesn't need to be massive. It could be very small or it could be very large, but we haven't changed them in some way, what was the point in even doing the presentation at all? Maybe we didn't even have to do it. To make a change in our audience is what we are trying to do. If I want you to see what's in my mind, I I'm going to have to change a little bit what's already in yours. And if I do that with pictures, and if I do that with a story, and if I do that by telling you the truth, then that change is actually going to last, and I will know that we've had an extraordinary presentation.
Show and Tell, the name of the book. Dan Rome, R-O-A-M, our guest on the program. Dan Rome is the website, danrome.com. Our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Information on the book there as well. Let's talk, and the time is going way too quickly, the 3 essential rules. We talk, obviously, with pictures, and you start by talking about telling the truth. And as I'm reading this, it makes so much sense because if we're telling the truth and comfortable, we become more confident and we become better presenters.
No, absolutely. Well, you know, my favorite quote, and this is one that's in the book, and I think this is probably my all-time favorite, and it's by none other than Mark Twain, you know, and he's saying, if you always tell the truth, you never have to remember anything. The only time you have to remember something is when you're not telling the truth, because you got to make sure that you're going to tell the same wrong story each time you tell it. Well, you know what? I have a terrible memory, so I just fall back and say, if I tell the truth, I'm going to be very, very comfortable. And let's face it, if the number one fear of Americans is public speaking, I believe that a large component of that is a fear of forgetting what we wanted to say and then looking like a fool, because we'll be standing up on stage, you know, metaphorically naked, you know, with nothing to say. So we're very afraid. So what we do is we take the wrong path to solving that. What we do is we say, I am going to make a very word-heavy presentation so that I never have a pause, and I'm going to memorize it. Well, my gosh, can we think of anything that's more terrorizing to our own mind than saying, I've got a whole slew of words that I have to remember perfectly and remember them in the high-stress situation of standing in front of a group of other people who are going to judge me? We have just set ourselves up for failure. So let's back off on this a little bit and say, how about we say a few fewer words? We say them more effectively by using pictures. We say them incredibly effectively by telling stories. And at the root of all of it, we're telling the truth. And you asked me about the 3 essential rules of an extraordinary presentation. There they are. Tell the truth. Tell that truth with a story. Tell that story with pictures. And we are good to go.
Do you sometimes think we come up with too many words? I get press releases all the time, and sometimes it's like, okay, I'm sure this was very well written, but I really don't know what you're talking about.
Well, that happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't think, Rick, that we're unusual given the absolute information overload that all of us live in and the incredible number of channels of information that are streaming at us all of the time. Look, let's face it. This world is not as it was a couple of hundred years ago, where you had just a few people with something really powerful to say and a couple of books that needed to be read. Everybody's got something important to say, and all of it's coming at us all at once. It's physically simply not possible. It's just not possible for us to take the amount of time we used to and try to go through everything that's coming at us. So what do we do to combat that? We spend a little bit more time preparing so that instead of saying more and louder, we say less and clearer. And now people are going to sit up, pay attention, and remember what we said.
Show and Tell, how everybody can make extraordinary presentations. Dan Rome, our guest on This Week in America. Time going by way too quickly. Point 2 you talk about there is telling a great story. Is that the key? You tell a story. Let's go back to show and tell. We're telling a story rather than getting up there and, again, thinking we need to memorize anything. I found that if you're telling a story, things sort of follow in sequence, and it's a whole lot easier to relate that than if you're trying to memorize something.
Well, exactly. Well, there are 2 reasons why story is good. You just nailed the first one, is if we can take all of our thoughts and force them into what we're going to call a storyline, so that is a clear linear path from beginning through middle to end, that's going to help us remember our story. But the second value of the story is we are only now beginning to understand that literally neurobiologically, how we think as people is story-based. There's a voice in our head which is constantly telling us stories about the things that we see, the things that we think, what are we doing. There's this constant narrative. It turns out that when someone tries to explain an idea to us using a whole bunch of facts, figures, data, concepts, models, we can't follow it very well. But the moment someone says, you know what, Rick, let me tell you a story about good presentations, it prepares our mind to be willing to accept what's going to come next. Because we say story, I love it. So good for us, helps us remember. Good for our audience, helps them follow.
A minute or so left in the program. Does this go back at what you're talking about? To, let's say the 2000 election with Tim Russert, who has his whiteboard up there, and you're going, okay, what's it going to take for Bush to win? What's it going to take for Gore to win? What happens here? What happens there? They're throwing all this out there. You're trying to remember it all. And he holds up the whiteboard, puts the states on. This guy has to get these states. This guy has to get these. Wipes it off, puts the new prediction up there, or the new possibilities up there. Was that breaking it down to its simplest form, and we could understand it?
Yeah. Well, all I would say is we need to channel Russert, or if people are sports fans, we need to remember the last time we saw John Madden.
I was going to say John Madden. Yes.
What's he doing? Look, the game just took place. The story unfolded before our eyes. Maybe we saw what happened. Maybe we didn't. But what was the brilliance of being able to have someone like Madden then take his little magic marker on the screen and say, this guy over here moved over here. This guy over here is going to move over here. When we see something and we see it visually, our mind gravitates towards in a way that words simply cannot do. And you nailed it. That's exactly the kind of presentation I'm talking about. Tell the story, supplement, tell that story with pictures, and it's going to be really clear and memorable.
Out of time, and I hope we can have Dan back in the program. And when you're talking about pictures, we're not talking about spending $5,000 and bringing in a graphic artist. You could even draw your own pictures, and we'll talk about that hopefully on a future program. We're fortunate to have Dan trying to break things down for us with his books, The Back of the Napkin, Unfolding the Napkin, and his new book. It's excellent, Show and Tell, How Everybody Can Make Extraordinary Presentations, available all across the country. Information on Dan at the website danrome.com, and, of course, information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Dan, a pleasure to have you back on the program. Look forward to having you back with us again.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Rick.
You're welcome. You're listening to This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us.